Hey y'all, it's Sally Loftus with Loftus Partners, and guess what? You get me and a whiteboard or flip chart today because I want to go over some great things with you. This is our Pay Equity Book Club. We are actually in chapter 2 of my book, which I don't have on me. Oh yes, I do. I got one right here. My book, Pay Equity Guide for Nonprofit Organizations, available on Amazon, is actually priced at $16.99. And you're going to find out why I chose that price today. So here we are. We've talked about in the first one, just kind of gave you an intro to the book. And then then I kind of gave you a history of pay equity last week, where we talked about government policy, cost of living, and remote work. And so we're going to continue on that work today. And I'm going to show you something in just a second. But first, I want to tell you some exciting news. I have a new training series coming out next week on August 8th. It's called the Allyship Learning Series. It's going to be 5 modules that you can purchase and complete on your own. And you will get teaching like this, me in front of a flip chart, talking about allyship in those things. So check out my website. There's a special if you buy 3. There will be 5. The other 2 will be coming in the next couple of weeks, but I hope you will look at those, purchase them. And if you are an email subscriber of mine, you got an email this morning with a super amazing discount for you. So if you're not an email subscriber, sign up. I'll drop the link in my comments. And you can see things like this. This is the cycle of socialization that I was working through yesterday in module 3. So let's take that down because we're not talking about that today, right? We are talking about pay equity. And what I want to do today is kind of work with this, amateur drawing of a pig. My niece, Kristen Moretti, who's going to join me in a few weeks for a live, actually did the pig that's in the book, which is so much better. She's so talented. But we're going to talk about this today. And if you've read the book or heard me talk, pay equity, I use that really as an umbrella term because there's a lot of stuff going underneath pay equity. And it's, here are some of those things like geography, cost of living, cost of labor, pay gaps, pay transparency, equal pay. These are all things that fall under the pay equity bucket or fall into it. And last week, and you can go back and watch my video on the Instagram page. Last week we talked about geography and cost of living. And we talked about how these are 3 things that really drive government policy. We talked about minimum wage and the Fair Labor Standards Act. Cost of living, which of course is here, but that definitely is driven in some ways by government. And then remote work, in that people are having, at least in the United States, very different experiences depending on the state, territory you're in. Even within the same state, different cities could have different laws around pay. So I encourage you to go back and watch that to understand that. Today, we are going to focus on pay gaps and equal pay. And as I kind of highlighted earlier in the week, one of the ways that we may know about equal pay is through the U.S. women's national soccer team. That's definitely one of the ways I got into learning about equal pay. And so I'm going to talk about some Olympic athletes today as we talk about this, but I encourage you to really kind of look into that particular lawsuit because I think a lot of times when we think about equal pay, at least for me, I just thought, well, there's like an organization choice. There's a business choice that they're just not going to pay women as much, or they're not going to pay Black women as much, or, a member of the LGBTQIA plus community. And it's really more unconscious stuff and traditions that we continue that need to be re-examined. So we're going to talk about that a little today. So kind of let me get my marker so we can get going on this. So whenever we talk about equal pay, that's really about getting equal pay for equal work, right? And so what happens is how that shows up in organizations is that you might have, a position that you filled, and you have 2 people maybe in the same position and they're making different salaries. It could be because somebody is, has 10 more years of experience, right? Or they've held certain jobs and, whatever. So what happens is that we may look at what people have made in the past, so a salary history, and then try to get as low a number as possible, which kind of goes back to cost of labor we'll talk about in another week. And we'll say, oh, well, this person has 10 years less experience, they're less capable. That's not always true. Sometimes it is true, absolutely, but sometimes it's not. And the two things that really drive a lot of equal pay issues and pay gaps that I want to focus on today. First, I'm going to go kind of in the flow of the book, is that I talk about women. So there is a 16% pay gap, which is why my book is $16.99. There's a 16% wage gap between men and women. Now, there are other genders beyond just men and women, and we don't have enough research about that at this point. So we know on average, people in the queer community typically make about 10% less, but that gap will continue to increase as you add more identities. So, maybe being of a different race and ethnicity, maybe ability, things like that. And we're going to talk about intersectionality today. So here are kind of the two things. So the thing I talk about in the book is I'm going to start with women. And what happens with women? Why do they not get equal pay? There's a lot of stuff out there. But the two things I want to point out to you now are two terms. And this is called the broken rung. So whenever you think traditionally, kind of how you move up in the organization and how you move up in pay typically is moving up in increased responsibilities, supervision, things like that, is that you're kind of going up this ladder, right? And so if you can see here, you may not from far away, but there's this first rung on this ladder is broken. And typically this represents someone's first supervisor role. And research has shown that women get less opportunities to get that first supervisor role, which means that it impacts their ability to increase pay over their career trajectory. So if we kind of equalized how many people of different genders get these first supervisor roles and it not be so male dominated, that could really decrease the pay gap. So that's one piece, and there's a lot of research out there about the broken rung. I encourage you to really read and learn more about that. The other concept that I talk about in the book is called the glass cliff. So this is my very rudimentary drawing of someone kind of hiking up. Did y'all ever watch The Price is Right? Like the little yodeler that went up that thing? That's kind of similar, right? Is that somebody's kind of going up, growing in their career, kind of going up that ladder, right? And then they get to the C-suite. So let's talk about women get to the C-suite. More often than not, women are given that C-suite opportunity in the most dire circumstances. The business is failing. Something, financially, they're in a crisis. Whatever. And so people are like, oh yeah, we can go out and hire somebody. They give it to a woman, rather than typically handing over jobs that are going to be as similar. And so what happens is that a woman gets up here and all of a sudden, all the support is gone, right? Everything they've done to build on here, everything's gone. And they have a much shorter trajectory in C-suite positions because they don't receive as much support and they're not put into typically the situations where they're going to find success. It's doomed to fail, right? So those are two concepts that are really important to understand for women in ways that you can decrease the pay gap. And this is systemic work, right? These are systemic interventions because, you've got to, as a business, be able to look at your data and understand what's happening here. So those are two pieces. Another piece within, so those are kind of women pay gap, the gender pay gap. So once you start adding identities, demographics to people, the gaps get greater. So one thing I talk about in the book is race and ethnicity. So I break down in the book based on a woman's race and ethnicity, her gap is going to get wider. So, for instance, equal pay day for women is usually in March of each year, because typically a man has to work, 12 months, and a woman's going to have to work 15 months because of the pay gap. In July, it was Black Women's Equal Pay Day. So typically Black women are going to have to work 17 months to make up the gap versus the 15 months. Actually, that's going to be, 17 months. Anyways, I can't do math today. And then we celebrate Latino women. There's Mom's Equal Pay Day is coming up in August. There's just a lot of different things that there are gaps there. So whenever you think of different race and ethnicity, right, there's going to be different, y'all, I can't spell today. There are going to be different things that contribute. So let's go with a Black woman, right? Let's say we're hiring a Black woman. So one, we have the glass cliff and broken rung already, and looking at that and the opportunities. Then as a Black woman, based on race and ethnicity, may not have had the opportunities to be in similar roles, to get the same kind of experience, may not have gotten into the colleges and universities that y'all really value, right, in your organization, or you think equate to a certain level of performance, things like that. So this is where kind of equity comes in, right? Is like, how do you get similar outcomes based on different pathways, right? And so it's really important to kind of understand how this works. This is called kind of when you have these multiple identities with impacts, is called intersectionality. Scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, definitely encourage you to research her and look at her work. She talks about intersectionality. So the more of these kind of historically marginalized identities a person has, the more barriers they have to overcome. And so a lot of times we've got to look at that and really think about. So for instance, this is why in a pay equity assessment, I'm always encouraging people to look at their data by different demographic information: gender, race and ethnicity, age, tenure, things like that, so that they can really see, are there any, again, systemic issues with how we're paying people. So that's, one way to decrease that gap, for instance, for Black women, would be, in addition to addressing the glass cliff and the broken rung, would also be looking at your pay data and saying, are Black women traditionally getting paid less than other people? And if so, why? What's the criteria? What's happening there? Because like I said, a lot of times in organizations, what I find is that people tend to be like reactive with their hiring. And so they don't understand how a decision here can impact other people within the system and create even greater gaps without knowing it. So the last thing I kind of want to talk about when we talk about equal pay and pay gaps is, I'm going to stretch it, go on this side, is going to be caregiving. So, here I am. Let's think, so let me go back and talk a couple of things about equal pay and pay gaps and how that relates to the Olympics, because I promised you some Olympic coverage. If I could have Snoop Dogg here, I would totally do it, but he's in Paris. Sorry. So here's what happens here. So Olympic athletes, U.S. women's national soccer team fought for years to get equal pay. For them, what that looked like is that they were not getting paid the same wages as the men. And the argument was that there weren't as many people watching, right? They couldn't get much money from advertisers, which, of course, if you watched women's sports in the last year, that's not true. So, and also they were getting different levels of bonuses than the men's team, even though the women's team had won 4 World Cups, y'all, 4. They were still getting paid less based on that. So they've kind of resolved that and worked out a new collective bargaining agreement. Something else to think about is, when we talk about caregiving. So caregiving is, raising children, taking care of yourself, taking care of family members, friends, maybe aging parents, things like that. This is a pretty big term. This is a lot there are a lot of impacts here. And so think about Simone Biles. She lost about $40,000 in the 2021 Olympics in Tokyo because she stepped out to take care of herself. Allison Felix. Love Allison Felix. She's not participating in this Olympics. She's retired, but she's the one who really fought for having childcare available at the Olympics, especially at the 2021 Olympics, whenever athletes were not allowed to travel with family because we were in COVID. And so nursing mothers had to leave their kids at home. Or maybe they had little kids, whatever, the age of children. There was no place for them because they couldn't have anybody else with them. So Allison Felix has really kind of stepped into that place, and recently Melinda French Gates has helped her fund it for this Olympics. But I encourage you, if you have a chance, look up Allison Felix and the work she's doing, and follow me on LinkedIn because I'm posting about that more there. So what happens with caregiving and pay gaps is that typically people have to take breaks in employment, right, to potentially take care of people. And that impacts their level of experience that then will get them a higher rate of pay. And what also can impact them is working at a place that doesn't have a flexible schedule. Flexible schedule is different than remote work. We can talk about that later. But what happens is like people have to take gaps to care for people. Or maybe a lot of their income is taken up with, let's say, childcare. There's a huge childcare crisis going on right now across the country. In North Carolina, we've had over 100 childcare centers close in the last year, and it's looking like another 300 in the coming year. And so what happens is if you've got kids and you need someone to care for them, especially maybe if they're not school age or even after school care, is that the prices are super high. I mean, I know a lot of people are paying $1,500, $2,000 a month, which is like a mortgage payment for childcare right now. Is that it's just cheaper to stay home and not work. But what happens is then, employers then see a gap and think you weren't doing anything, right? When really you were at home taking care of somebody. So it's really important to think about, like, if you have employee resource groups, caregivers is a great one to have. Also important to think about, like, are we punishing people because they stayed home to care for someone and they don't have as much experience? They're still doing stuff, right? When you're caring for a child, an elderly person, a person with, maybe disabilities that needs a full-time helper, you're doing a lot of stuff. You're managing things, you're building relationships with people, you're keeping partnerships going. We really need to examine how we assume people get experience. It's not always through a job, y'all. They can get experience volunteering. They can get experience being a caregiver. That is really important in the workplace. So today I've talked about 3 kind of different ways that equal pay and pay gaps happen. Again, I go into a lot more detail about this in the book. I hope you'll buy it. And next week, we are going to get into doing the pay equity work. So we're going to start with preparation, phase 1 preparation next week. I hope you'll join us. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you next time. Bye.